The stagecoach deposited Beatrice Fairmont back in front of the Mercantile in Las Animas, Colorado, on a bitter February morning in 1878. Her single carpetbag clutched in both hands and her heart somewhere in the dust beneath her worn boots. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia to become the bride of a cattle rancher named Harold Winters, only to be returned like faulty merchandise after 4 days of marriage, because she had not spoken enough to suit him. Harold's exact words still echoed in her ears as he handed her the annulment papers that morning. "I need a wife who can entertain guests and fill the silence of my home with chatter. You are more like a ghost than a woman." Beatrice stood on the wooden sidewalk watching the stagecoach pull away, feeling the stares of every passerby burning into her back. The mountain wind cut through her thin traveling coat, but she barely felt it over the suffocating weight of shame pressing against her chest. She was 22 years old, alone in a frontier town 1,500 miles from home, with exactly $14.30 to her name. The agreement had been that Harold would pay for her return passage to Philadelphia, but he had given her only enough for 2 weeks' lodging at the boarding house and declared that she would need to find her own way back east. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, had been kind enough when Beatrice first arrived 3 weeks ago, full of optimistic advice about married life. Now the older woman stood in the doorway of her establishment with her arms crossed, her expression somewhere between pity and disapproval. Beatrice forced herself to walk toward her, each step requiring more courage than she thought she possessed. "I heard what happened," Mrs. Patterson said quietly as Beatrice climbed the 3 steps to the porch. "Harold Winters is a fool. Come inside before you freeze." The boarding house smelled of lye soap and coffee, familiar scents that should have been comforting but only reminded Beatrice how far she was from anything she knew. Mrs. Patterson led her to the same small room on the 2nd floor where she had stayed before the wedding, a narrow space with a single bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "I can give you the room for a week on what Harold paid," Mrs. Patterson said. "After that, you will need to find work or figure out passage home. I am sorry, dear, but I cannot afford charity." "I understand," Beatrice said softly. "Thank you for your kindness." Mrs. Patterson hesitated in the doorway, her stern expression softening slightly. "There is nothing wrong with being quiet, girl. My late husband always said the loudest wheel gets the grease, but the quiet one keeps the wagon moving. You will find your place." After the door closed, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They were smooth and pale, the hands of someone who had spent her life doing fine needlework and managing household accounts, not the weathered hands needed for frontier survival. Back in Philadelphia, her silence had been considered ladylike, appropriate for an unmarried woman of modest means. Her mother had always told her that a soft voice and quieter demeanor were virtues. But here in Colorado, where survival required boldness and adaptation, her quietness had been judged as a deficiency worthy of rejection. She did not cry. Tears had never come easily to Beatrice, even as a child. Instead, she unpacked her carpetbag with methodical precision, hanging her 2 dresses in the narrow wardrobe and arranging her few toiletries on the washstand. She had a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother, a small Bible, a collection of Jane Austen novels, and a leather journal in which she had written exactly 3 entries since leaving Philadelphia. The words never seemed adequate to capture what she felt, so mostly the pages remained blank. The next morning, Beatrice began searching for work. Las Animas was a cattle town of roughly 800 souls, situated along the Arkansas River with the Rocky Mountains rising purple and imposing to the west. The main street consisted of a mercantile, a feed store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, a small hotel, a church, a schoolhouse, and the land office. The surrounding territory was dominated by cattle ranches of varying sizes, with homesteaders scattered throughout the valley trying to eke out livings from difficult soil. The mercantile owner, Mr. Dawson, looked her up and down when she inquired about work. "I need someone who can deal with customers," he said bluntly. "Cattle hands and ranchers do not want to wait around while someone whispers at them. Can you manage that?" Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I can speak clearly when needed, sir." "Maybe so, but Harold Winters has been telling everyone in town you barely said 2 words in 4 days. I cannot risk it." He turned back to his ledger, dismissing her. She tried the hotel next, but the proprietor had already heard about Harold's rejection and said he needed someone with more personality to manage the front desk. The school teacher, a stern woman named Miss Hadley, said she had no need for an assistant. The church minister's wife suggested Beatrice might find work as a seamstress, sewing in her room and selling pieces through the mercantile, but Mr. Dawson had already turned her away. By the 3rd day, Beatrice's situation had grown desperate. She had eaten nothing but bread and apples to conserve her money, and the week Mrs. Patterson had given her was running out. She sat in her room that evening, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her circumstances. She could write to her aunt in Philadelphia and beg for money for passage home, but it would take weeks for a letter to arrive and a response to return, and she had nowhere near enough money to survive that long. Her parents were both dead, victims of influenza 5 years ago, which was why she had been living with her aunt, and why a mail-order bride arrangement had seemed like her best option for a future. The next morning, she walked further from town, towards some of the outlying ranches and homesteads, thinking perhaps someone more isolated might need help with cooking or laundry. The February air was sharp and cold, the ground hard with frost, but the sun shone brilliantly against the impossible blue of the western sky. She had never seen skies like this in Philadelphia. Here, the heavens seemed to stretch forever, unobstructed by buildings, vast and indifferent to human struggles. She was nearly 2 miles from town when she saw smoke rising from a chimney behind a grove of cottonwood trees. A narrow dirt path led toward it, and she followed it until she reached a small ranch. The house was modest but well-maintained, built of logs with a stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, along with several corrals containing perhaps 20 horses. They were beautiful animals, well-muscled and alert, their coats gleaming even in winter. A man emerged from the barn as she approached, and Beatrice stopped walking, suddenly uncertain. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who did hard physical labor daily. He wore dusty work clothes, a sheepskin coat, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he came closer, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair, tanned skin, and striking gray eyes that studied her with careful attention. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that suggested he came from somewhere further south originally. Beatrice found her voice, though it came out softer than she intended. "I am looking for work, sir. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, anything you might need. I am a hard worker and I require only fair wages and perhaps a place to sleep." He continued to study her, his expression unreadable. "You are the mail-order bride who was returned to town." It was not a question, and Beatrice felt the familiar heat of shame creep up her neck. She lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, my name is Beatrice Fairmont. Xander York. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. Why did Harold Winters return you? The directness of the question took her off guard. Most people had been whispering behind her back rather than asking outright. She considered lying or deflecting, but something about his calm, steady gaze made her tell the truth. He said I was too quiet. He wanted a wife who would entertain his guests and fill his house with conversation. I could not be that person. Xander was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes never leaving her face. Then he said something she had not expected. Your silence is peace. Beatrice blinked, uncertain she had heard him correctly. Pardon, I said your silence is peace. He gestured toward his house and land. I have been alone out here for 3 years. Before that, I worked on cattle drives and in mining camps, places where men never stopped talking, arguing, bragging, making noise just to hear themselves. When I finally saved enough money to buy this land and start breeding horses, the thing I valued most was the quiet, the sound of wind in the trees, horses nickering in the barn, the river running over stones. Your silence is not a fault, Miss Fairmont. It is a gift, and Harold Winters is a damned fool for not recognizing it. Beatrice felt something crack open in her chest, some tight, painful knot she had been carrying since Harold handed her those annulment papers. Her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. That is kind of you to say, Mr. York. It is not kindness, it is truth. He paused, seeming to consider something. I do need help. I am trying to build this horse breeding operation, but I spend all my time training and caring for the animals. The house is a mess. I have been eating mostly beans and bacon for months, and my clothes are more patch than original fabric at this point. I can offer you room and board, plus $20 a month. There is a small room off the kitchen that was meant to be a pantry, but I could put a bed in it for you. It would not be much, but it would be private and warm. $20 a month was more than fair wages for housekeeping, plus room and board. It was more than Beatrice had dared hope for. But she had to ask the obvious question. Why would you hire me when everyone in town has refused? You only have my word that I can do the work. Xander's expression remained serious. Because I watched you walk up that path and you moved quietly. You did not stomp or shuffle. You did not hum or talk to yourself. You moved like someone who understands that silence is not empty, it is full of attention. That tells me you notice things, and people who notice things do good work. He paused. Also, those horses in the corral did not spook when you approached. Horses are good judges of character. They can sense anxiety and aggression. They stayed calm around you, which means you have a calm spirit. That matters to me more than whether you can chatter at dinner parties. Beatrice looked at the horses, then back at Xander York. He was offering her exactly what she needed, a chance to survive, to prove she had value despite Harold's rejection, to find her footing in this harsh but beautiful territory. When would you like me to start? Today, if you are willing. I can take you back to town to collect your things and settle your accounts. I am willing. Xander hitched a horse to a simple wagon, and they rode back to Las Animas together. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary conversation, which Beatrice appreciated more than she could express. Instead, he pointed out landmarks, his ranch's boundaries, a place where the river had flooded last spring, a meadow where he planned to expand his pastures. His voice was quiet and measured, never demanding responses, simply sharing information he thought she might need. Mrs. Patterson looked relieved when Beatrice returned to settle her account, with Xander York standing respectfully in the boarding house parlor. I am glad you found a position, the older woman said. Xander is a good man. He will treat you fairly. How do you know Mr. York? Beatrice asked as she packed her carpet bag. He bought flour and supplies from my late husband before Thomas passed. Always paid his debts on time, always polite. Keeps to himself mostly, but that is not a fault in my book." Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice. "He came here from Texas after the war. I heard he lost his whole family to violence during Reconstruction, but he does not talk about it. Just works hard and minds his own business." Beatrice absorbed this information silently, understanding more about why Xander might value peace and quiet. The ride back to the ranch took nearly an hour. Xander's property was more extensive than Beatrice had initially realized, nearly 300 acres running along the Arkansas River, with good grazing land and access to water. He had built everything himself, he explained, starting with a simple dugout shelter and gradually constructing the log house, barn, and corrals over 3 years. "I have 22 horses right now," he said as they approached the barn. 5 are breeding mares, 1 is a solid stud, and the rest are young stock I am training to sell. My goal is to breed reliable working horses for ranches and the cavalry. Nothing fancy, just good, steady animals that can work all day and not go lame or crazy." He showed her around the property with quiet pride. The barn was well organized, with tack hanging neatly and the stalls mucked clean. The corrals had been built with careful attention to safety, the fences high and sturdy. The house was small but solidly constructed, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, a bedroom for Xander, and the small pantry room he had mentioned. "I will need a few hours to clear this out and bring in a bed," Xander said, opening the pantry room door. It was tiny, perhaps 6 feet by 8 feet, with shelves lining one wall currently holding preserved foods, tools, and other supplies. A small window looked out toward the cottonwood grove. "I can help," Beatrice said. "You are not afraid of work, are you?" "No, sir." They spent the rest of the afternoon reorganizing. Xander moved most of the pantry supplies to shelves he built in the kitchen, then brought in a narrow bed frame and mattress from the barn, where he had stored them after buying them from a homesteader who had given up and returned east. Beatrice swept the room thoroughly, washed the window, and made up the bed with linens Xander provided. By evening, she had a small but private space that was entirely her own. For dinner, she cooked the first real meal the house had seen in months. Xander had chickens, so she made eggs with bacon, biscuits from the flour in his pantry, and coffee. He sat at the rough-hewn table and ate with focused attention, not speaking until he had finished. "That is the best meal I have had in 3 years," he said finally. "You are a good cook, Miss Fairmont. Thank you. I can do better with more variety of ingredients. I noticed your pantry is somewhat limited. I tend to buy only what keeps well, but I can get you whatever you need from town. Make a list." That first evening set the pattern for the days that followed. Beatrice rose early before dawn and started coffee and breakfast. Xander would come in from the barn where he had been feeding and checking the horses, eat quickly, and then return to his work. Beatrice spent her days cleaning the house, which desperately needed attention after 3 years of bachelor neglect, washing clothes, mending, and preparing meals. Xander came in for lunch and dinner, ate with appreciation, and then returned to his horses. They exchanged few words, but the silence between them was comfortable, peaceful rather than awkward. After a week, Beatrice had the house properly organized and clean. She turned her attention to improving their food situation, using her limited funds to buy seeds for a kitchen garden she would plant when the weather warmed, and being creative with Xander's basic supplies. She made soups and stews from dried beans and preserved vegetables, baked bread regularly, and even managed a dried apple pie that made Xander pause mid-bite and look at her with something like wonder. My mother used to make pie like this, he said quietly. I had forgotten what it tasted like. Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. I am glad you enjoy it. I do not just enjoy it, Miss Fairmont. You are making this place feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep between work. The next morning, Xander asked if she would like to learn to help with the horses. I am not suggesting you do heavy labor, he clarified. But if you are interested, you could help with feeding and grooming. It would free up my time for training and the horses would benefit from more handling. Beatrice had limited experience with horses beyond riding in carriages, but she was intrigued. I would like to learn. He started her with the gentlest mare, a sweet-tempered bay named Clover who was heavy with foal. Xander showed Beatrice how to approach calmly, how to read the horse's body language, how to brush in long, soothing strokes that the mare clearly enjoyed. His teaching style matched his personality, patient and quiet, demonstrating rather than lecturing. You have gentle hands, he observed as Beatrice worked the brush over Clover's shoulder. That is important with horses. They respond to your energy. If you are tense or aggressive, they become tense. If you are calm, they calm down. It is like a conversation without words. Beatrice glanced at him, struck by the observation. I suppose silence can be a form of communication. The best kind sometimes. Words can lie, but the way someone moves, their energy, that tells the truth. Over the following weeks, Beatrice fell into a rhythm with ranch life. She discovered she had a natural affinity for the horses, perhaps because her quiet nature put them at ease. She learned to feed them, groom them, clean stalls, and even assist Xander with basic training exercises. Clover became especially attached to her, nickering whenever Beatrice approached and resting her massive head against Beatrice's shoulder while being groomed. March arrived with violent mood swings. Warm, sunny days followed by late winter storms that dumped snow across the valley. During one particularly bad storm, Beatrice and Xander were forced to spend an entire day inside while the wind howled and snow piled against the walls. They sat by the fire, Xander mending tack while Beatrice worked on sewing new shirts for him from fabric he had bought in town at her request. Can I ask you something personal, Miss Fairmont? Xander said after hours of comfortable silence. Of course. Why did you come west as a mail-order bride? You are educated, well-spoken, clearly capable. You could have found other options in Philadelphia. Beatrice kept her eyes on her stitching. My parents died when I was 17. I went to live with my aunt, but she has her own children to support, and I was an extra mouth to feed. I worked as a seamstress, but the pay barely covered my keep. My aunt began pressing me to accept a marriage proposal from a widower in his 50s who wanted a mother for his 6 children. He was not unkind, but the thought of that life made me feel like I was suffocating. She paused, choosing her words carefully. When I saw Harold's advertisement seeking a bride, it seemed like an escape, a chance to build something of my own. I did not realize that the West would have its own requirements, its own expectations that I could not meet. You are meeting them now, Xander said quietly. You are doing excellent work here. The house has never been so well kept, the meals are wonderful, and the horses trust you. That is not nothing, Miss Fairmont. Thank you, but this is employment. Harold wanted a wife. Harold wanted an ornament. There is a difference. Xander set down the bridle he was working on and looked at her directly. You should know that people in town are talking. Some are saying I took advantage of your situation, that it is not proper for you to be living here unchaperoned. Beatrice felt her stomach sink. She had been so grateful to have found this position. She had not fully considered how it might be perceived. I see. I want you to know that your reputation and comfort matter to me. If the talk bothers you, we can make other arrangements. Perhaps you could stay in town and come out here during the day, or I could hire on another hand to act as chaperone, though that would complicate the finances. What do you want, Mr. York? He was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I want things to continue as they are. I enjoy having you here. The ranch runs better, my life is more comfortable, and your presence is peaceful rather than intrusive. But your needs matter more than my preferences. Beatrice considered this. The truth was, she was happier than she had been in years. The work was hard but satisfying, the landscape was beautiful, and Xander was the most considerate man she had ever encountered. The thought of returning to town, to the pitying looks and whispers, to the isolation of a boarding house room, made her chest tighten with anxiety. I would like to stay, she said firmly. I do not care what people in town say. I know my own character, and you have been nothing but respectful. If they choose to think poorly of me, that is their failing, not mine. Something shifted in Xander's expression, a warmth entering his gray eyes. You are braver than you give yourself credit for, Miss Fairmont. Or perhaps I am simply tired of letting other people's opinions dictate my life. He smiled then, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious face. Good. That is the right attitude for living out here. As March turned to April, Beatrice noticed her feelings toward Xander beginning to change. What had started as gratitude and respect was deepening into something more complex. She found herself watching him work with the horses, admiring his patience and skill, the way his body moved with unconscious grace, the gentle way he spoke to even the most difficult animals. She noticed small details, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the roughness of his hands from years of hard work, the quiet intelligence in everything he did. She tried to suppress these feelings, reminding herself that she was his employee, that he had hired her out of kindness when she was desperate, that allowing herself to feel more would only lead to another painful rejection. But the heart did not listen to such practical arguments. One evening in mid-April, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Xander asked her about her family. She told him about her parents, her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had managed their modest household with love and efficiency. She told him about learning needlework at her mother's knee, about her father teaching her to read and keeping her supplied with books even when money was tight. They sound like good people, Xander said. They were. I miss them every day. Beatrice paused, then gathered her courage. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you lost your family. I do not mean to pry, but if you ever want to talk about it, I am willing to listen. Xander was silent for so long that Beatrice thought he would not answer. Then, quietly, he began to speak. I was 19 when the war ended. My family had a small farm in East Texas. We were not wealthy, but we had enough. My father had been too old to fight, and I was too young for most of it, so we survived the war itself. But after, during Reconstruction, things got violent. There were night riders, men angry about how the war ended, taking out their rage on anyone they saw as a target. My father tried to stay neutral, tried to just work his land and keep us safe, but one night they came anyway. He stopped, his jaw working. Beatrice waited, not pushing. They burned the house with my parents inside, shot my younger brother when he tried to run. I was in town that night, buying supplies. By the time I got home, everything was gone. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Beatrice could hear the ocean of pain beneath that careful control. I buried them, sold what was left, and headed west. I could not stay in Texas. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ashes. Beatrice reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. I am so sorry. Xander looked down at her hand on his, then slowly turned his palm up and laced his fingers through hers. They sat like that as darkness fell. hands joined, sharing silence that was heavy with grief but also with understanding. After that evening, something unspoken shifted between them. They began sitting together on the porch most evenings, sometimes talking, often simply existing in each other's company. Xander started teaching Beatrice to ride properly, not side saddle as she had learned in Philadelphia, but astride, the practical way frontier women rode. She was nervous at first, but he was patient, and eventually she gained confidence. In early May, Clover went into labor. Xander had been watching her closely for days, and when her time came in the middle of a warm night, he woke Beatrice to help. They worked together through the long hours of labor, Xander's experience and Beatrice's calm presence helping the mare through the difficult process. Just before dawn, a perfect bay colt was born, all long legs and enormous eyes. Beatrice stood next to Xander in the stall, both of them exhausted and covered in straw, watching the colt struggle to stand for the first time. When he finally managed it and wobbled toward his mother to nurse, Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Why are you crying?" Xander asked softly. "I do not know. It is just so beautiful. New life. Hope." She wiped at her face, embarrassed. "I am sorry, I am not usually emotional. Do not apologize." Xander reached out and gently brushed a piece of straw from her hair, his fingers lingering near her cheek. "You have given me hope too, Beatrice. This ranch feels alive again because you are here." The use of her first name sent warmth flooding through her. She looked up at him, at his tired, gentle face, and knew she was falling in love with this quiet, damaged, good man. "Xander," she said softly, testing his name on her tongue for the first time. He smiled, that rare, transformative expression. "I like hearing you say my name." They stood close together in the dim barn, the smell of horses and hay around them, the sound of the colt nursing filling the silence. Xander raised his hand and cupped Beatrice's cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear tracks. "I know I am just your employer," he said quietly. "I know you came here because you needed work, not because you wanted to be here, but I need to tell you the truth. I am falling in love with you, Beatrice Fairmont. Your quiet strength, your gentle spirit, the way you have brought peace to my life. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone after what happened to my family. But you have made me believe in the possibility of happiness again." Beatrice's breath caught. "You are not just my employer, Xander. You are the first person who has ever valued me for who I am rather than who they wanted me to be. You saw worth in my silence when everyone else saw only deficiency. You gave me a chance when I had nothing and nowhere to go. How could I not fall in love with you?" He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not want. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a kiss full of promise rather than demand. Beatrice had been kissed before, by the suitor her aunt had pushed on her and briefly by Harold on their wedding day, but those kisses had felt like obligations. This kiss felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want you to be my employee anymore, Beatrice. I want you to be my wife. But I know you were burned by marriage once already. I know you might need time to trust that I mean what I say, that I will not change my mind or reject you. I am willing to wait as long as you need." Beatrice felt joy and terror warring in her chest. The practical part of her mind warned that she barely knew him, that she had been wrong about Harold, that she could be hurt again. But her heart knew the truth. Xander York was nothing like Harold Winters. He had proven his character through months of consistent kindness, respect, and patience. He valued her for exactly who she was. "I do not need time," she said firmly. "I trust you, Xander. Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms coming around her and pulling her close. They stood in the barn as dawn light began filtering through the gaps in the walls, holding each other while the mare and her newborn colt dozed peacefully in their stall. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Las Animas. The ceremony was simple, with Mrs. Patterson standing as witness along with the ranch hand. Xander had hired the previous month to help with the spring work. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Xander wore a new suit he had bought specially for the occasion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Beatrice felt none of the anxiety and doubt she had experienced at her first wedding. Instead, she felt only certainty and happiness. The talk in town was intense, as they had known it would be. People whispered that Beatrice had trapped Xander, that she had used her position in his household to seduce him, that the marriage would not last. Harold Winters apparently said she would leave Xander just as quickly as she had been removed from his home. But Xander and Beatrice paid no attention to the gossip. They knew the truth of their relationship, and that was all that mattered. Their wedding night was gentle and intimate, Xander taking his time to make sure Beatrice felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay in bed together, Beatrice's head on Xander's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" "Yes. For the first time since I lost my family, I feel like I have a home again. Not just a house, but a home. You did that, Beatrice." Summer arrived with its intense heat and endless work. Beatrice discovered she loved ranch life, despite its hardships. She took on more responsibilities with the horses, particularly working with the young stock, gentling them and preparing them for training. Her quiet nature was an asset with the nervous youngsters, who responded to her calm presence. In July, a horse buyer from Denver came to look at Xander's stock. He was impressed with the quality and training and purchased 3 young geldings for more money than Xander had expected. After the man left, Xander swept Beatrice up in his arms and spun her around, laughing. "We are going to make this work," he said. "The ranch, the breeding program, all of it. We are going to build something real here." "We already have," Beatrice said, kissing him. "We have already built something real." That evening they celebrated by having a picnic dinner by the river. Xander had shot a turkey which Beatrice had roasted, and she had made fresh bread and berry preserves. They sat on a blanket watching the water flow past, the mountains purple in the distance, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink. "I have been thinking," Xander said. "We should start planning for the future. I want to expand the herd, build more corrals, maybe hire another hand permanently. And I want to build a bigger house, one with a proper bedroom for us and rooms for children eventually. Would you like that?" Beatrice felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I would like that very much. I want to build a life with you, Xander, a real, lasting life. You have not regretted marrying me, even when the work is hard and the isolation is intense. Not for a single moment. You gave me something I never had before. You gave me the freedom to be myself without apology. That is worth more than any amount of comfort or society." He pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You gave me the same gift. After my family died, I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. I did not think I could let anyone in again. But you slipped past my defenses without even trying, just by being exactly who you are." As summer turned to fall, they worked together to prepare for winter. Beatrice preserved vegetables from the garden she had planted, put up jams and pickles, and sewed warmer clothes for both of them. Xander and his hired hand brought in hay for the horses, made repairs to the barn, and selected which animals would be sold and which would be kept for breeding. In October, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to be certain before telling Xander. When she finally shared the news one evening at dinner, he sat perfectly still for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As certain as I can be. The baby should come in late spring." Xander buried his face in her lap, his shoulders shaking. Beatrice ran her fingers through his hair, realizing he was crying. She had never seen him cry before, not even when he told her about his family. "Xander, what is wrong?" He looked up at her, his eyes wet. "Nothing is wrong, everything is right. I never thought I would have a family again. I thought that part of my life was over forever, but you have given it back to me. You have given me everything." Beatrice pulled him up and kissed him, tasting salt on his lips. "We have given each other everything." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Beatrice suffered from nausea through much of the winter, and the physical demands of ranch work became harder as her body changed. But Xander was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on more of her tasks and insisting she rest whenever she seemed tired. He became obsessive about her health, bringing her tea and making sure she ate properly, fussing over her until she laughingly told him to stop hovering. "I cannot help it," he said. "You are carrying the most precious thing in the world. I want to make sure nothing goes wrong." "I am not fragile, Xander. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. You are my wife, and you are carrying my child. That makes you precious to me. Let me worry if I need to." In February, Xander hired a woman from town to come stay with them for the last months of the pregnancy and to help with the birth. Her name was Ruth Collins, a widow who had experience as a midwife. She was a practical, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who immediately took charge of preparing for the baby's arrival. "You have a good husband," Ruth told Beatrice one day while they were washing clothes. "Not many men show such care for their wives out here. Some treat their horses better than their women." "I know how lucky I am," Beatrice said. "Xander is an exceptional man. He looks at you like you hung the moon. That is a rare thing." The baby came in early June, on a warm day when the cottonwoods were in full leaf and the meadow flowers were blooming in riot of colors. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the afternoon and into the night. Xander paced outside the bedroom, refusing to leave the house despite Ruth's suggestion that he go work in the barn. When the baby finally arrived just after midnight, it was a boy with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair. Ruth cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Beatrice's arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling. "A healthy, strong boy." Beatrice looked down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by a surge of love so intense it almost frightened her. This small person, this perfect little human, was hers and Xander's. They had created him together, and he represented the future they were building. "Can Xander come in?" she asked Ruth. "Of course. It is his son, too." Ruth opened the door, and Xander practically ran into the room. He stopped at the side of the bed, staring at the baby in Beatrice's arms with an expression of absolute wonder. "It is a boy," Beatrice said softly. "We have a son." Xander reached out with one finger and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers curled around his father's finger, gripping with surprising strength. Xander made a choked sound and blinked rapidly. "He is perfect," he whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but had not made a final decision. Now, looking at her husband's face, Beatrice knew what the name should be. "What was your father's name?" Thomas York." "Then we will name him Thomas after your father. He will carry on the name and the legacy." Xander leaned down and kissed her forehead, then kissed the baby's downy head. "Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for giving me back everything I thought I had lost." The months after Thomas's birth were challenging but joyful. Beatrice had read about motherhood, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of caring for an infant. The sleepless nights, the constant feeding, the worry that accompanied every small cry or sneeze, it was exhausting. But it was also deeply fulfilling. Watching Thomas grow and change, seeing Xander's face light up whenever he held his son, feeling the weight of this new little person in her arms, it filled Beatrice with a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Xander was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he could despite the demands of the ranch. He would come in from working with the horses and immediately wash up to hold Thomas, talking to the infant in a soft, gentle voice, telling him about the ranch and the horses, and all the things they would do together when he was older. One evening in late summer, Beatrice found Xander standing by the window in their bedroom, holding Thomas and pointing out at the mountains turning purple in the fading light. "See those mountains, son," Xander was saying. "Your mother and I built a life in their shadow. We came here with nothing but hope and hard work, and we made something real. Someday this will all be yours, but more important than the land or the horses is the lesson. When life knocks you down, you get back up. When people reject you for who you are, you find people who appreciate you. When you think you have lost everything, you stay open to the possibility that you might find something even better. Your mother taught me that. She is the strongest person I have ever known, even though the world tried to tell her she was not enough because she was quiet. Do not ever let the world tell you who you should be, Thomas. Be true to yourself and find people who love you for exactly that." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. She had been so afraid when Harold rejected her, so certain that her quietness was a fatal flaw that would prevent her from ever finding happiness. But Xander had seen her silence as peace, as a gift, rather than a deficiency. He had looked past the surface and seen her true worth. In doing so, he had given her the courage to value herself. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Beatrice had largely resumed her work with the horses, carrying the baby in a sling while she did lighter tasks. Thomas seemed to enjoy being around the animals, watching them with wide, curious eyes. Clover, the mare who had first accepted Beatrice's care, was particularly gentle with the baby, stretching her neck over the stall door to sniff at him softly. "He is going to grow up loving horses just like his parents," Xander observed one day, watching Thomas reach out toward Clover with pudgy hands. "I did not love horses before I came here," Beatrice reminded him. "You taught me that. No, you already had it in you. I just gave you the opportunity to discover it." He slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Just like you already had strength and courage in you, life just had not given you a reason to show it yet. That winter was hard with heavy snows and brutal cold. But the house Xander had built was warm and solid, and they had plenty of supplies laid in. They spent the long evenings by the fire, Xander reading aloud while Beatrice sewed and Thomas played on a blanket at their feet. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, built on mutual respect, love, and the quiet peace they had found in each other. In the spring of 1880, Harold Winters came to the ranch. Beatrice saw him approaching on horseback and felt her stomach clench with old anxiety. She called to Xander, who was working in the barn, and he came immediately, his expression darkening when he saw who their visitor was. Harold dismounted and stood awkwardly near his horse, looking between Beatrice and Xander. He looked older than Beatrice remembered, with deeper lines in his face and a weariness in his posture. "Mr. Winters," Xander said coldly, "what brings you here?" "I came to speak to Mrs. York," Harold said, his eyes on Beatrice. "If you will permit it." Xander looked at Beatrice, making it clear the decision was hers. She nodded. "It is all right, Xander. I will hear what he has to say." "I will be right here," Xander said, moving to stand slightly behind her, a silent statement of support, Harold cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. York, I came to apologize. I have heard how well you are doing, how you have made a successful life with Mr. York. I heard you have a son. I was wrong to send you back to town the way I did. I was wrong to judge you as deficient when the failing was mine." Beatrice studied him, trying to assess his sincerity. "What changed your mind, Mr. Winters?" He looked down at his boots. "I married again 6 months after you left. A woman from Denver who talked constantly, just like I thought I wanted. She filled my house with noise and social gatherings and endless chatter. We were divorced within a year. She ran off with a salesman, taking half my savings with her." He looked up at Beatrice. "I realized too late that conversation and noise are not the same as companionship. You were quiet, but you were also kind and competent and peaceful. I was a fool to let you go, and I wanted you to know that I recognize that now." Beatrice felt Xander tense behind her, but she kept her own voice calm. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Winters. But I want to be clear about something. You did not let me go. You rejected me and sent me away with barely enough money to survive, leaving me stranded in a strange town with no resources or support. I could have ended up desperate or dead because of your actions. The fact that I found happiness was not thanks to you, it was despite you." Harold flinched. "You are right. I am sorry. I was thinking only of myself and what I wanted, not about your welfare or your future." "Your apology is noted," Beatrice said firmly, "but I do not forgive you, Mr. Winters. What you did was cruel, and the fact that you now regret it does not erase the harm you caused. I have built a good life here with my husband, and I do not need or want your validation. Now, I think you should leave." Harold nodded, looking like he wanted to say more but recognizing he had no right. He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. After he was gone, Xander turned Beatrice to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "Yes. Actually, I feel wonderful." Beatrice smiled. "For so long I thought being rejected by him meant something was wrong with me. But seeing him just now, I realized the truth. He is a small, selfish man who does not know how to value what is real. I am glad he sent me away because it led me to you. I would not change anything about how my life has unfolded." Xander kissed her deeply. "You are magnificent, Beatrice York. You have always been magnificent. I am just grateful I was smart enough to see it." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Xander's reputation as a horse breeder spread throughout Colorado and beyond, with buyers coming from as far as Wyoming and Kansas to purchase his animals. Beatrice managed the household and the business accounts, raised Thomas, and continued to work with the horses she loved. They built the larger house Xander had promised, with a real parlor and multiple bedrooms and a wraparound porch where they could sit together in the evenings. In 1882, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Anna, after Beatrice's mother. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named Matthew. The house was filled with laughter and noise and the chaos of children, but underneath it all was the foundation of peace that Beatrice and Xander had built together, rooted in their quiet understanding of each other. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his parents did. By the time he was 8, he was already helping with the training, showing a natural gift for reading the animal's behavior. Anna was more adventurous, always climbing trees and trying to keep up with her older brother. Matthew was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, still young enough to spend most of his time clinging to Beatrice's skirts. One evening in the summer of 1886, after the children were in bed, Beatrice and Xander sat together on the porch swing he had built the previous year. She was 30 years old now, and he was 34, both of them weathered by years of hard work but happy in a deep, settled way that came from building a life together. "You ever think about how we met?" Xander asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. "Sometimes. I think about standing in front of the mercantile with my carpet bag, feeling like my life was over. I think about walking up your path, terrified that you would reject me like everyone else had. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special. You moved so quietly with such grace. And when you told me why Harold had sent you back, I wanted to ride into town and punch him in the face for being such a damned fool." Beatrice laughed. "I am glad you did not. You might have ended up in jail, and then where would I be? Still here, waiting for me. You are strong enough to run this ranch on your own if you had to." "Maybe, but I am glad I do not have to. I like running it with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the rustle of wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of an owl, the soft sounds of horses moving in the corrals. "Your silence is still peace," Xander said quietly. "Even with 3 children and a busy household, when you are near me, I feel calm. That has never changed." Beatrice lifted her head to look at him. "You saved me, Xander, not just from destitution, but from a life where I would always have been told I was not enough. You taught me that I was exactly enough, exactly right, just as I was. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You saved me too. I was so closed off after losing my family, so determined never to let anyone in again. You slipped past every defense I had just by being gentle and kind and peaceful. You made me believe in happiness again, in family, in the future." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 8 years of love and partnership and shared struggle. When they pulled apart, Beatrice settled back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Every single day more than the day before." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out in their full glory, scattered across the black velvet sky in impossible numbers. The ranch stretched out around them, land they had worked together, animals they had raised together, children they had created together. It was a life built on the foundation of a single profound truth, that silence could be peace, and peace could be the beginning of everything. In 1890, when Thomas was 14 and already working the ranch alongside his father, when Anna was 8 and fearless and Matthew was 6 and sweet, Beatrice Fairmont York stood in the kitchen of the house she had helped build and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it took her breath away. She had come west as a rejected mail-order bride, deemed too quiet to be worth keeping. She had been returned like faulty merchandise, abandoned in a strange town with nothing and no one. But she had found Xander York, a man who saw value in silence, who recognized that peace was a gift rather than a deficiency. Together they had built not just a ranch but a family, not just a business but a legacy. They had created a life rooted in mutual respect, quiet understanding, and deep, abiding love. That evening, the whole family gathered on the porch after dinner. Thomas was talking about a promising young mare he was training. Anna was begging to be allowed to ride into the mountains alone, a request both Beatrice and Xander firmly denied. Matthew was half asleep on Beatrice's lap, his head heavy against her shoulder. Xander sat next to her, his hand covering hers, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her wrist. "Tell us the story of how you met," Anna demanded suddenly. "Tell us about when Mama first came to the ranch." Beatrice and Xander exchanged glances. They had told the story before, but the children never tired of hearing it. "Your mother arrived on the coldest day in February," Xander began, his voice falling into the familiar rhythm of the tale. "She walked up the path to the ranch looking for work, and she moved so quietly that the horses did not even spook. I knew right then that she was special. And Papa gave Mama a job even though everyone in town said she could not do anything right, Anna added, having heard the story enough times to know all the parts. That is right. Because I could see what other people missed. Your mother's quietness was not a weakness. It was strength. Your silence is peace, Thomas quoted, having heard his father say the phrase countless times over the years. Exactly, Xander said, squeezing Beatrice's hand. Your mother taught me that peace is the most valuable thing in the world, and together we built all of this. He gestured to the ranch spread out around them, the house and barn and corrals, the horses grazing in the pastures, the mountains rising in the distance, purple against the darkening sky. Will you tell us more? Matthew asked sleepily from Beatrice's lap. So they continued the story, both of them contributing pieces, telling their children about those early days, about learning to work together, about falling in love, about building their life one day at a time. The children listened with rapt attention. Even Thomas, who was nearly grown because it was their origin story, the foundation of their family. When the story was finished and the younger children had been carried to bed, Beatrice and Xander remained on the porch. Xander pulled Beatrice into his arms, and they swayed together in a gentle dance with no music except the night sounds around them. You ever regret it? Beatrice asked softly. Taking a chance on a rejected mail-order bride, bringing all this complication into your peaceful life. Xander pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Beatrice, you are the best decision I ever made. You did not complicate my life, you completed it. Before you, I was just surviving, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to truly live. You did the same for me. I was so lost when I met you. I thought being quiet made me defective, that I would never fit anywhere. You showed me that I was exactly right just as I was. You were always exactly right. I just happened to be the one lucky enough to see it. They kissed under the vast Colorado sky, the same sky that had witnessed their first meeting 12 years ago, the sky that had watched them build their life together step by patient step. Around them, the ranch was quiet except for the gentle sounds of horses settling for the night, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant murmur of the river. Inside the house, their 3 children slept safely, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and valued. In the barn, the horses that were the foundation of their livelihood rested in clean stalls. In the fields, the land they had worked so hard to improve stretched out fertile and productive. And on the porch, Beatrice and Xander York held each other. 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, who had built from rejection and pain something beautiful and lasting, who had proven that sometimes the quietest voice can speak the deepest truth. Beatrice had been returned for being too quiet, rejected as insufficient, abandoned in a strange place with nothing. But Xander had looked at her and seen peace. He had valued her silence when everyone else demanded noise. He had recognized her strength when others saw only weakness. And together, they had created a love story that would echo through generations, a reminder that being true to yourself will eventually lead you to the people who love you for exactly who you are. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of ranch life. By 1895, Thomas was 19 and increasingly taking over the day-to-day operations of the horse breeding business, showing the same patient skill with the animals that his father had always demonstrated. He had grown into a thoughtful young man, quiet like both his parents, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's gentle nature. Anna, at 13, was spirited and bold, equally comfortable helping with the horses or working alongside her mother in the house. She had inherited Beatrice's grace and Xander's determination, creating a combination that promised she would make her own unique mark on the world. Matthew, at 11, was the family's emotional heart, quick to laugh and quick to comfort, beloved by his siblings and his parents alike. He had a gift for music that had emerged early, and Beatrice had saved for months to buy him a battered but functional guitar from a traveling merchant. On summer evenings, he would sit on the porch and play, his young voice surprisingly rich as he sang folk songs and ballads. The ranch had expanded significantly over the years. Xander had purchased adjacent land twice, and they now ran 60 horses on nearly 600 acres. They had built additional barns and hired 2 permanent hands who lived in a small bunkhouse Xander had constructed. The York Ranch was known throughout Colorado for producing quality horses, and buyers regularly traveled significant distances to purchase their animals. Beatrice managed not just the household but also the business accounts, correspondence with buyers, and coordination with suppliers. Her organizational skills and attention to detail had proven invaluable to the ranch's success. The quiet woman who had once been rejected for not talking enough had become an essential partner in a thriving business, proving that competence and value came in many forms. One autumn afternoon in 1895, a letter arrived that would connect Beatrice to her past in an unexpected way. It was from her aunt in Philadelphia, the first correspondence she had received from that direction in over 10 years. Beatrice sat at the kitchen table and opened it with shaking hands, uncertain what to expect. The letter explained that her aunt had recently learned of Beatrice's success and happiness from a traveler who had passed through Las Animas and then happened to visit Philadelphia. The aunt wrote that she had often wondered what became of her niece, had worried that encouraging her to go west as a mail-order bride had been a terrible mistake. She expressed relief and joy that Beatrice had found happiness, asked after her children, and included a photograph of Beatrice's cousins, now grown with families of their own. Beatrice read the letter twice, emotions swirling through her. There was old pain there, memories of feeling unwanted and burdensome in her aunt's home. But there was also understanding. Her aunt had been struggling to feed her own children. Encouraging Beatrice to seek a husband had not been meant cruelly. It had been a desperate attempt to provide her niece with a future when the aunt had so little to offer. That evening, Beatrice showed the letter to Xander as they sat together after the children had gone to bed. "Will you write back?" he asked. "I think I will. Not to reconnect deeply, but to let her know I am well, that I harbor no anger toward her. She was doing the best she could with limited options, just like I was." "You are generous to feel that way." Beatrice shook her head. "Not generous, just honest. If my aunt had not encouraged me to come west, if Harold had not rejected me, I would never have found you. Every difficult step of that journey led me exactly where I needed to be. I cannot be angry at the path that brought me home." Xander pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Have I told you lately that you are the wisest person I know?" "Yes, but I do not mind hearing it again." She did write back to her aunt, a kind letter that briefly described her life, enclosed a photograph of her family that had been taken the previous year in town, and wished her aunt well. It was a closing of a circle, a final letting go of old hurts, a recognition that life had worked out exactly as it should. In 1898, Thomas married a young woman named Sarah Miller, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. It was a good match. 2 quiet, serious young people who understood the demands of ranch life and shared a love of horses. They built a small house on the eastern edge of the York property, and Thomas continued to work the ranch with his father while building his own small herd of cattle. Watching her son get married, Seeing him start his own family, Beatrice was struck by how profoundly her life had changed since that cold February day when she arrived at Xander's ranch. She had gone from a rejected bride with nothing to a wife, mother, and partner in a successful business. She had children and now a daughter-in-law who looked at her with respect and affection. She had a home, land, a place in the world that was entirely her own. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked, coming to stand beside her at the wedding celebration. They were in their early 40s now, both showing gray in their hair, both weathered by years of hard work but still deeply in love. "I am thinking about how far we have come, how much we have built together." "We have built something good," Xander agreed, "something lasting." "Your silence is peace," Beatrice quoted softly, repeating the words he had said to her so many years ago, the words that had changed everything. Xander smiled and pulled her into his arms, right there in front of everyone at the wedding celebration, and kissed her deeply. Some of the guests chuckled or clapped, but Beatrice did not care. She kissed her husband back, grateful for every single day they had shared, grateful for every challenge they had overcome together, grateful for the life they had created from rejection and second chances. As the years continued to unfold, as Anna married a school teacher from Denver and moved to the city while staying close to her family, as Matthew pursued his music while also working the ranch, as grandchildren began to arrive, Beatrice and Xander York remained at the center of it all. They were the foundation, the steady presence, the example of what love could build when it was rooted in respect, understanding, and acceptance. The ranch continued to thrive, passing eventually to Thomas and his children, becoming a legacy that would span generations. But more than the land or the horses or the business success, the real legacy was the story of how it all began. The story of a quiet woman who was rejected for not talking enough, and a quiet man who recognized that her silence was peace. The story of two damaged people who found in each other exactly what they needed to heal and grow and build something beautiful. Beatrice York lived to be 73 years old, long enough to see her grandchildren grown and to hold her first great-grandchild. She spent her final years sitting on the porch she loved, watching the mountains she had come to think of as home, surrounded by the family she and Xander had created together. And when she passed peacefully in her sleep on a warm June night in 1926, she died knowing she had lived a life of profound meaning and love. Xander followed her 2 years later, unable to imagine continuing without the woman who had been his partner for nearly 50 years. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside Las Animas, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and a single inscription that their children had chosen. "Your silence is peace." The story of Beatrice Fairmont and Xander York became family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that being true to yourself will eventually lead you to the people who love you for exactly who you are, a testament to the truth that sometimes the quietest voices speak the deepest wisdom, and a beautiful example of how love, respect, and acceptance can transform rejection and pain into something lasting and good. And on the ranch they built together, where their descendants still raised horses and worked the land, where the cottonwoods still rustled in the mountain wind, and the river still ran clear over ancient stones, their presence could still be felt in the peace that settled over the property at dusk, in the quiet understanding that ran through the family like a thread of gold, in the knowledge that silence, when shared with the right person, can be the most eloquent conversation of all.